Fantastic. Amazing. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. As we continue our shiur in Sefer Sichos Haran, let me share my screen here. And we will jump into it. Okay. Amazing. Good. So we continue, Be'ezras Hashem, with Sichos Haran Kuf Pei 180. And we're going to have, we'll see how long it takes. We may have a little bit shorter of a shiur. I didn't include so many teachings. There's a lot going on today, and so wanted to still learn. But we'll see how far we get. We'll see how far it takes us. But the tzaddik starts like this. Pam achas amrli Rabbeinu Zal, says Rebbe Nachman, a very enigmatic thing. One time Rebbe Nachman said, Shahayoim nirlei malach chadash v'yodea shemai. A new angel appeared to Rebbe Nachman that day. V'yesh tachtav memunim v'yesh lem shofars biyadav. This malach had a bunch of underlings, had a bunch of malachim that were subordinate to it, and they were all carrying shofars. Each one was carrying a shofar. V'him toikin tekiah. They were blowing tekiah. V'achakach trua, and then the shofar sound of a trua, the broken shofar sound. V'achakach choizer metoikim tekiah, and then they were blowing tekiah again. And Rebbe Nachman said, "V'hem kulam choifrim umevakshim achar avedus." All of these angels were searching after lost things. That was what was revealed to Rebbe Nachman in this vision of angels who are searching after avedus. Ki yesh devarim avudim harbe. Rebbe Nachman says that there are many lost things in this world. Many things are lost. V'zeh b'chinas, the pasuk in Tehillim says, Tavas Rishaim Toived. The Rishaim are lost in their taiva, in their lust, in their desire. So we see that there are things that are lost. There are people that are lost. There are spiritual energies that go missing, that are mischanneled, misdirected. And Rabbi Nachman points out that the Rashi Tevos, the acronym of these three words, Tavas, Rishaim, Toived, is Tarat, which is Tekiah, the sign for Cherua, right? So the resh is used to distinguish between Tekiah and Cherua. So it's Tekiah, Cherua, and Tekiah. That's the Taf of Tavas, the resh of Rishaim, and the Taf of Toived. Yachbru v'yavedu. Yachbru v'yavedu means that the malachim were seeking and searching Yachbru. They were digging and searching for the yavedu, for those things that were lost. And this is what was apparent and clear to Rabbi Nachman, that there are things that are lost and there are spiritual energies that are searching after those things that are lost. And those tzaddikim and those malachim, those angels, who Rabbi Nachman says in the Torah that we're learning in the mornings, Likutei Moharan, the Rebbe says in Likutei Moharan Torah 33, that the malachim is a reference to tzaddikim. Ilun inun de mizgabran al yitzreihain. That's a reference to those who are able to be mizgaber on their yetzer hara. Those are tzaddik. Those are malachim mamish. Damyon the malachim mamish. They're mamish angelic. And their job is to go searching for all of the things that are lost, to help all the people who come into their charge, the people who follow their advice, the people who listen to their teachings. The job of the tzaddik is to help those people find what they've lost in life, to find those parts of themselves that have been scattered away from their identity, from their personality, to help them reclaim all the parts of themselves that might be in exile. And that's the aspect of the shofar. Because the whole thing of the shofar, of course, tekabeh shofar gadol l'chirisenu, v'sanes l'kabetz goliyasenu. The shofar is blown as the symbol of return, as the symbol for tshuva, as the symbol for redemption, for self-actualization. The shofar, in its very physical form, we've mentioned this in the past in different contexts, represents the movement from narrowness or particularity into a space of fullness. That's how the shofar goes, from the narrow tip, and then it gets wider and wider and wider and wider. And if you have a really, really straight shofar, like mamash, like chatzotzros, perfectly straight shofar, and you look into the shofar from the wide part, you can see the narrow part in the wide part. It means from the narrow end, it looks like that's all there is. Then from the wide end, you see that little part is part of a greater whole. And the shofar itself represents the journey from specificity and particularity into fullness, into wholeness. And that's what not only the physical form of the shofar, but the sound of the shofar, tekiah, trua, tekiah, represents exactly this. The initial blast, which is tekiah, is hinting to a primordial oneness, the way that things used to be. Hashem created the human being yashar, where the human being is created with everything he or she needs. We're born pristine and healthy and holy. Our bodies are functioning properly. Our emotions are functioning properly. Our mind is developing properly. And then vehema bikshu cheshbonos rabim. But with time, we go from tekiah, which is that primordial oneness, into trua. Trua, says Rebbe Nachman in Torah Yud, is from the lashon of the pasuk Cheroi aim b'shevet barzel, shatter them with an iron rod. The word cheroi aim means brokenness. That's what the trua is. It's the broken blast. That has to be the same length as a full blast, but it's all split up. Trua, shattered pieces. The things that get left behind because they're no longer seen as integrated and part of a person's whole experience. And so a person closes parts of themselves away. And a person loses touch with parts of who they are, parts of their story, that they see, they understand and perceive as incapable of being integrated into the whole, incapable of being redeemed, to be ingathered to the Eretz Yisrael within. So naturally, these malachim, which are tzaddikim, that are searching or helping people find their lost things, are going to be walking around blowing shofars. Because that's what the shofar represents, both in terms of its physical form, moving from part and then bringing the part back to the whole. It's what the shofar represents in its audial form, from tekiah, which is that primary oneness, through to trua, which is the brokenness, and then finally to the final tekiah, is to bring all those broken pieces back together. And it also represents redemption. Tekah shofar gadol l'cherusenu. This is what we're davening for. Right now, Klal Yisrael is splintered, is shattered. We're not one unified whole. We're living in different places. Ideologically, we're splintered. Emotionally, we're divided. And what we daven for isn't simply Hashem, bring us all back to Eretz Yisrael. It means on every level, bring us together. There are so many things that have been lost. There are so many pieces of ourselves that it's called pizer hanefesh. We're just shattered across the surface of life, and all of the pieces of the glass that make up our identity have slid far, far, far away, and we can't reassemble our mind and our heart, and we can't find peace. So we use the shofar as the tool to be able to move us from a place and an experience of fragmentation into an experience of unity, where all of the parts that were perceived to be lost and dead and gone are rediscovered, reintegrated, re-invited, re-embraced, and resituated within a healthier, greater whole. But says Rebbe Nachman, sometimes that tzaddik, who's busy helping everybody else find their lost objects, sometimes he also loses things. This is an understanding of the pasuk in Koheles, Parak Zayin. Yesh tzaddik oived b'tzidkai. There is a tzaddik who gets lost b'tzidkai in his great righteousness. And most of the Mefarshim over there learn this, Rashi and others learn this to mean, and not that the tzaddik himself gets lost, but that even if a tzaddik should stumble, it's b'tzidkai, it's still with righteousness. That's how they interpret it, which is a much gentler, safer interpretation, as it were. But there are those Mefarshim that learn it in a more literal sense. Sometimes the tzaddik, as a result of too much righteousness, can get lost. One of the Mefarshim points to Eov as an example of a person who considered himself so holy, and therefore he couldn't conceive of why the terrible things that happened to him would have happened to him. He ended up fighting with Hashem and denying Hashem's mishpat. That's a b'chin of yesh tzaddik oived b'tzidkai. There is an aspect of the way in which the tzaddik himself is lost as part of the trajectory of his righteousness and tzidkus. What's the point? Why is this so? Why is it that sometimes the tzaddik himself or herself gets lost? Says the Rebbe, then the tzaddik has an opportunity to do tshuva. And there are sins that cause avedos. There are certain actions or inactions that are specifically catalysts for this experience of losing things, of pizur, of things getting lost, of sparks of holiness that get swallowed up by negative forces. So when the tzaddik himself falls, he's then able to do tshuva on this chait that causes everybody else to lose things. But Rabbi Nachman is quick to clarify that this doesn't mean that the tzaddik literally falls into that particular behavior. There's just, in some sense, the tzaddik experiences some element of this. Then when the tzaddik goes ahead and does tshuva on this slight blemish that in some sense is in the same category, or at least is similar in some way to this ultimate aveira that is causing so many people to feel like they're losing parts of themselves, when the tzaddik does tshuva, that enables him to discover so many other lost objects as a result of having had to go into that darkness to discover what are those sparks of holiness there, to be able to share some kind of relatability with the people that he's encountering. And when he discovers those avedas and elevates them back to their place through tshuva, nasa simcha v'rash gadol. This produces great joy in Shamayim, v'rash gadol, and an awesome rash, an awesome celebration. V'amar az, then Rabbi Nachman said, shekasha ma'od liyas mekabel. It's really difficult to be mekabel, to be on the receiving end of life. Ukfi anirahu, and it would appear shemekabel mazik u'poigim me'inin avedas, that a person who's mekabel can sometimes lose a lot of avedos. Shal yidei zabayim avedas kach nearly midvarav. But this is extremely mysterious. That's what it appeared that Rebbe Nachman, in the context of talking about things that are lost, said kasha ma'od, not that it's just difficult, but that it's damaging in some sense. Liyas mekabel, in some sense, to be a person who's always taking as opposed to giving, and that could oftentimes be the result of feeling as if there are things that are lost in our lives as a result of being too rooted in the energy of being mekabel as opposed to being mashpia. But it's completely mysterious as to what he means. And then Rabbi Nachman said, take a look in Likutei Moharan Tinyana. In the second volume Ois Peites, Likutei Moharan Tinyana 89, which discusses the Kabbalistic intentions for the month of Elul and their relationship with Pegam Bris, with rectifying or fixing, the blemish of that area of spirituality, of the area of morality. And the idea of fruits that have not yet ripened, everything is tied together with this. That's what he said. This, says Rebbe Nachman, is what I heard from Rebbe Nachman's own mouth. But these words remain completely mysterious and we're not able to fully grasp them. So that's going to be a little homework. If you'd like, you can look that up on your own. It's quite a lengthy teaching and it's not really our subject, so I didn't want to bring that whole piece from Likutei Moharan here. But what I did want to focus on is that Nekuda that Rebbe Nachman says, sometimes the tzaddik who's helping other people find their avedos, sometimes he himself gets lost. He himself loses things, and then in the tshuva process is able to bring everything back up. Which is quite a radical idea. So I wanted just to learn with you quickly a teaching from the Berditchever Rav in Kedushas Levi. This is Parshas Ba'aloischa, where the tzaddik says Ba'aloischa Saneros, a very similar idea. Ba'aloischa, when you elevate, when you kindle, when you ignite the candles, with Hanukkah coming up around the corner, says the Heilige Rebbe ki yesh l'fa'amim tzaddik noifel mimadregasai. Sometimes you can have the possibility of a righteous person who suddenly experiences a yerida, falls down from his madrega. And the reason is very, very guided and precise. Ki Hashem yizbarach chavetz chesed, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is full of love. And all of the sparks of holiness that have fallen through one way or method or another down into the dark forces that conceal Hashem's presence. Hashem wants that they should be elevated and that they too should be brought into the service of Hashem. And it appears when a tzaddik falls from his spiritual level, he's almost in the place where the sparks have fallen to. Obviously, the tzaddik, being a tzaddik, is absolutely bound up with shirish ha'elyon, with the higher spiritual realms. And therefore, v'chayzer b'yeser says, right away he's going to do a big, strong tshuva, v'yeser eyes, with greater strength and greater power. This will cause the holy sparks to which the tzaddik descended to cling to the tzaddik, and then the tzaddik's able to elevate them with his tshuva. And this is what the pasuk says: Over here, it doesn't just simply mean that Aaron is kindling the flames on the menorah. It's a reference to the holy sparks. When the tzaddik is involved in elevating the nitzotzos to kedusha, al pnei hamenorah ya'iru shivas haneres. Those sparks should be focused al pnei hamenorah. Lashon paneh kasher yifnu anitzotzim el hamenorah shezu yashchina shayre she'elyon. When those sparks turn toward the menorah, that the menorah is always a reference to Malchus. It's the kli, it's the vehicle, the vessel that carries all the seven branches of the menorah. Malchus is the menorah itself, is the kli. So when the nitzotzos are drawn toward the energy of the Shekhinah by virtue of the tzaddik being in that place and then rising back to Hashem through tshuva, then all of the midos that might have experienced the degradation of being mischanneled, misused, chesed, gevura, tiferes, netzach, hod, yesod, and so on, they all have their elevation by way of the tzaddik who sunk down to that place in some aspect. Rebbe Nachman says obviously doesn't mean he sinned in the same way, but in some sense there's some level that tzaddik descends, and upon doing tshuva, is ba'aloischa es haneres. All of those holy sparks are able to rise up with the tshuva of the tzaddik. So a very similar teaching that we find from the Rebbe's very good friend, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak ben Zara Sasha Sichos Haran the Kedushas Levi. Let's take a look at this teaching Sichos Haran 181. And the Rebbe continues to speak about the madrigas that he reached. Shamati b'shmai, Rebbe Nachman says, I heard in the name of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Sha'amar b'zu alashan, that Rebbe Nachman said the following, Rabbi Nachman rather said the following thing. He said, Ani yodea chachmas, I know wisdoms, she'mayisi maschel legalos ma'at me'achachmas sheni yodea, if I would begin revealing even just a little bit of the chachmas that I know, hayu yichaylim lichyos al yedei atanuk shal asagas hachachmas ha'elu levad, b'li shamachilu shasiyah. No one would need to eat or drink. A person would be totally sustained by the wisdom itself. As the pasuk says, "Ha-chachma techaya es va'aleha." There's a person who is sustained by their chachma. And the whole world would be nullified, yearning to hear the wisdom that this individual had to reveal. People would go out of their mind. People would lose themselves on account of the overwhelming sweetness and pleasantness and deliciousness of the chachmas that Rabbi Nachman would want to reveal. But the Rebbe said, I can't reveal them to humans. Because when I start to speak to an individual, I want to hear what he says, because the Rebbe was able to perceive what lay beyond the mask of whatever words were being spoken, to be able to perceive the Sayyidei Torah that Hashem was communicating to him through the words of this individual, totally unbeknownst to the person that was speaking to the Rebbe. But there was great Torah that was hinted to in that person's circumstances, in that person's dreams, in that person's messages that he was conveying to the Rebbe. And therefore, therefore, the Rebbe never had occasion to reveal his awesome and extraordinary holiness and wisdom. He also spoke about the awesome nature of the Torah that he was able to perceive. I was not able to hear these words from his holy mouth, but I only heard it from others. And see at the end of Sefer Sipurei Maisius, where it's printed there, that there are chachmas in this world that enable a person to live without eating or drinking. Now, this reference to what was printed in the back of Sipurei Maisius is actually a reference to Sichos Haran itself, because Sichos Haran was originally an appendix to Sipurei Maisius, to Rebbe Nachman's stories, and then afterwards it was separated and embellished. And so here in Sichos Haran you have a reference to a teaching that we're going to learn later in Sichos Haran. That's what's being referenced here. So here we take a look at the Rabbeinu Bechaya to Shemais, Perich of Daled Pasuk Yud Aleph. And the pasuk says, "Ve'elatzilei b'nei Yisrael lo shilach yadai." The chiefs, the tzaddikim, and leaders of Klal Yisrael were not harmed. Vayechzu asalikim. They saw the divine revelation. Vayochlu vayishtu, and they ate and they drank. This is a reference to Matan Torah and what ensued of Moshe Rabbeinu going up for 40 days and 40 nights. So the Rabbeinu Bechaya said, "Val derech hamedrash vayochlu vayishtu." What does this mean? They ate and they drank. V'chikilor ali imam l'Sinai, that they brought cake up to Har Sinai. Like, what a strange thing! You're talking about that they saw God, and all of a sudden they're cutting up a birthday cake. What do you mean to say? They ate and they drank. What does that mean? Darshu v'vayikar Rabba parashas Achri Mos. That's what the Medrash says. Pirish. Kilar is an uga, right? Kilar is that said Kilar al Imam l'Sinai. Did they bring a cake up to Har Sinai with them? That's an uga. So it says no. No, it doesn't mean, we're not telling you that they packed a picnic lunch and went up to Matan Torah with that and they ate and drank. We're talking about achila mamish, achila v'hadois, true achila. Shenamar, because the pasuk says, Ba'ar Pnei Melech Chayim. Life is perceived basking in the light of the living God. Ubir ze ki mazen hanefesh v'iduna ba'oisa hamara nafla yichana kasav la'achila shesiyah shu idan aguf. The support and the sustenance of the physical body is called idan aguf. That's referenced by these words, vayochlu, vayishtu. They ate and they drank. We're speaking about the vitality that their bodies got from the vision. Ba'oisa hamara hanefla, from that awesome revelation of Hashem's presence and Hashem's wisdom. V'cheina amar David alav hashalom, and like David HaMelech says in Tehillim, Kimoy chela v'deshen tizba nafshi. My soul was saturated by you, Hashem, like chela v'deshem, like the choicest, fattiest foods. If the physical body should be sustained by eating food that is a result through production of the further distillation away from nature of food that itself grew out of other natural substances, all the way going back and then through the higher worlds up until HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And ki lo ya'al alechem levad yichya adam, like the Ari HaKadosh says, and the pasuk says, a person doesn't live through the bread alone. Ki im al kol moitzi pi Hashem yichya adam. A person lives through Hashem's word. In other words, there are sparks of kedusha in that. So if a person gets physical sustenance from eating a cupcake, which has in it, through a whole huge filterage system, sparks of divinity, alachas kama v'kama sheteskayim hanefesh b'eskashra b'sibal yoyna rishoni yisbarach. It's only logical that if a person knew really how to be medabek their guf in the original source of all life, ba'or pnei melech chayim va'atam adveikim b'Hashem alekechem chayim kulchem hayayim, so alachas kama v'kama, all the more so. It's just logical. Like, obviously, we should be able to be sustained by that if we could be sustained by sparks of that in food. V'hu hamazon ha'amiti. That's the true sustenance, hakayim, that really exists and enables us to exist. V'achila havadayis hanitzchis, and this is what's referred to as achila vadai, like the true and certain food. Okay, inin shekasa, like the pasuk says, yirviun mideshen beisecha. We want to be sustained and saturated mideshen beisecha from the food of and the bounty of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's house, and nachal adonecha tashkem, and to be quenched by the nachal adonecha, by the streams of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's pleasantness. Ki imcha mekar chayim. You know why? Because ki imcha mekar chayim, Hashem, you are the mekar hachayim. And this, that food keeps me alive, is just because there are some faint sparks of kedusha in there. But ultimately, if I'm able to connect to you alone, like the tzaddikim were, they didn't need to eat at all. Only because there's avodah begashmias, so they actually ate and drank and did so consciously and made brachas and so on. Because it says in the Torah, v'chalta v'savato v'rachta. But from the standpoint of a life force of vitality, they were going straight to the source. So you see a beautiful source in Rabbeinu Bechaya for what Rebbe Nachman is teaching, that there are chachmas that would enable a person to stay alive even without any eating and drinking. So let's finish today with this piece from Sichos Haran. We'll read it together. It's Sichos Haran Shin Mem 340. And it's a very, very deep and beautiful expression from Rebbe Nachman, Sichos Haran. Amar, he said, Ha'olam lo ta'amu aisi klum adai, the world has tasted nothing of me. Ilu ha'yashayim rak Torah acha shani oimer. If they would only hear one Torah lesson that I reveal, im hanigan v'harikot shela, together with its song and dance, heim kulam b'telim b'bitol gamer, everything would be nullified. Hanu kala olam kula afilu chayes va'asavim, the animals, the plants, v'chol ma sheyesh ba'olam, everything else that exists in the world, hakol hayim is batlim b'chlois hanefesh migoydel oitzim hatanug hamufla v'hamuflug ma'od ma'od, would be totally and entirely entranced and paralyzed with awe at the sweetness and the pleasure of this mysterious revelation of one of Rebbe Nachman's Torahs, but not just the Torah, but with the song and the dance. And we can understand this in the following way. A person who knows the secret of singing and dancing, the person who sings miteva hanigun, it's the way of song, a person really becomes really one with the music. A person who knows how to dance, they don't feel their bodies anymore. All they feel is the music pulsating through them. And every particular part of the melody has a corresponding movement in the body that isn't really sort of choreographed or consciously planned. It's just flowing. It's authentic. It's a person's literally tapped into that force, and they're just allowing the melody to carry them along. And it causes different parts of the person's body to move as a result of the notes of the melody that are pulsating within them. Mikol shekain, all the more so, mishi yachal lirkaid l'raked she harikad mechuben mamish kefi tenuas hanegin. Imagine a person who literally knows the secret of what body movements are supposed to be mechuvan, are supposed to be associated with the various movements of the melody. Ki yesh tenuas b'chol ever ve'ever sheshayach l'tenuas hanegin. Every limb of the body has an aspect of movement that's supposed to be reflecting the nuances of the melody. By this part of the melody, a person has to twist his head, right? Or lichbal atzmai, or to do a somersault on the floor. And the same is true for the other limbs and the legs. And a person who knows the secret of dancing knows how to put these two things together, where if you see him dancing without the melody, you know what the melody is, right? Based on the movements. And when you hear the melody and you see the dance, it isn't two things. The dance is a direct reflection of the choreography, as it were, of the melody. Now imagine a person who sings not just any old melody, but there are words to the melody. It's an actual song with words. And then the melody matches the words. So it isn't just that there's some melody, and then, okay, whatever, they just found some, opened the Tanakh and found some random pasuk and put it to the melody, and then some random person is making dance motions, but it's not aligned. No, over here we're saying, imagine if it's all perfectly unified. So you have the words, and the words are reflected in the nuance and the motion of the melody, and then the dance is completely aligned and reflective of the movement of the melody as well. Shemisader shir v'diburim tenuas hanigin. Sha'ashir v'diburim shayachim b'kivun gadol hanigin. Shemishgal hashir mechuven mamish kefini imas hanigin. That the sweetness of the melody is aligned perfectly with the inyan of the words. V'gam arikun mechuven mamish kefini imas hanigin mishgal hashir kikule echad. And then the dance is also perfectly aligned, and it's all one thing. When a person merits to hear this melody, with the words and with a dance like this, where everything is perfectly aligned all the way through. Right, the words, the lyrics and the melody and the dance are all one thing. When a person hears that and sees that, it's just too awesome. It's beyond. This is the greatest pleasure of all pleasures, and there's no pleasure greater than this. A person who never tasted this doesn't know what pleasure is. Fortunate is one who has seen this. Fortunate is the eye that has beheld this. Even in Olam Haba, not everybody has the privilege of being witness to this spectacle. If we do the preparation that we have to do in this lifetime, so then one day we'll access it. And the people who stand around the individual who's in this experience of song and lyric and dance, they don't know what to do with themselves. They just stand there, stunned into silence, overwhelmed by the great pleasure. And he continues to do what he needs to do. So Rebbe Nachman says, try to understand this as best as you can. It's really impossible to describe this in writing. A person who knows the secret of dancing and music, that person can understand a little bit of what's being communicated here and what the Rebbe meant to say. Also, the people who are closer to the source of the music, the dance moves happen much more naturally. Like we see with our own eyes in the parable mentioned earlier. A person who understands more deeply the song and the dance, they start to move. They themselves are activated as a result of this great inspiration of the song that's being played and the words that are being sung. Right? Like we see you also start singing and dancing just because you're so impacted by what's going on around you. Right? You can't help it, and before you know it, you're tapping along and nodding along, and before you know it, you're swept up into it. It's the same way when a person begins to come closer to holiness, to tzaddikim amitim, to true leaders, to true groups of mevakshei Hashem, people who are really trying to serve Hashem be'emes. Kol ma shesamach yoser al haTorah v'hanigin v'harikud nasa gamkein etzle tenua shel kol haniskalel shel hakdusha memela. You come closer to the song, you're going to start dancing. You come closer to people who are dancing, you're going to be swept up into it. So Rebbe Nachman says, Kol zeh shamati ba'atzmi, I heard all of this myself. I heard all of this personally. Ubalashon Ashkenaz, and I heard in Yiddish, Shamati va'omer b'zualashon, he said, Ze zolin mich herren ein Torah mit dem Nigen und mit ein Tanz, weil's die ganze Welt ausgegangen. Either way, if they would only hear Rak Torah achash in Omer, one lesson, Iman Nigun va'arikot shala, with its song and its dance, Hayukala olam kulam kulai mizbatl m'kleis hanefesh. The world couldn't handle it. And then he said again, Was hab ich gesagt? What did I say? The Heishavlei Arav Rebbe Nachman Zechron Levracha Shamar Kachal Anal. And the Rebbe went deeper into this, and he says, "Was meinst du? What do you think? Afilu chayes v'asavim, not just people, even animals and even grass, kechol haniskala el, would be totally nullified if the Rebbe would reveal that wisdom, The Rebbe had wisdom to reveal. He didn't reveal all of it. The Rebbe said, Nitzachti, I was victorious, va'anatseach, and I will be victorious. This thing of what Rebbe Nachman of Breslov is and what he came to the world to reveal is not over yet. It's not over yet. There are great revelations that still need to be revealed, and will be. Afterwards, Rebbe Nachman said that I heard in his name, Sha'amar b'Rosh Hashanah, that he said on Rosh Hashanah, Yeshli nigun lezamer la'asid lavai. I have a song that I will sing in time to come, Shehu yeh ha'olam haba shel kol tzaddikim v'chasidim. That this song will be the olam haba of the tzaddikim and the chasidim. This is connected to what we learned here. This is related to the final lesson that Rebbe Nachman taught, which is Likutei Moharan Tinyana, the second volume, Torah Ches, the 8th lesson. That he said very, very shortly prior to his departure from this world. Over there he speaks about the song on an instrument with 72 strings. And see also the story of the 7 beggars in Sipurei Maisias. Mysteries, mysteries, mysteries. Unfathomable, impenetrable mysteries. We have no inkling of what this person was. Zero. There was never anybody like him from before. There will never be anybody like him since. Total mystery. But there's a coherence to it. There's a structure. And the structure that Rebbe Nachman wanted to reveal in his Sichos, which is Chaim Haran and Sichos Haran, in his stories, Sipurei Maisias, in his Torah, Likutei Moharan, it all comes together, not necessarily to make any of this any clearer or more explicit, but to people who are paying attention with their heart, and people who are humble and don't get turned off by this stuff and say he was a madman and walk away, but people who have the humility, people who have the desperate, urgent search, pulsing within them, a desire to get close to Hashem, and the sense that here you can find great treasure, mysterious treasure. Then while you might not get absolute clarity into any of this, slowly but surely, in the Bechina of Noida v'Sha'arim Bala, just, you don't know it clearly in your brain, but you begin to perceive the patterns. They begin to come together. They begin to make just a little bit more sense and coherence. And then, again, while nobody can really put a finger on it and say what it means or what it doesn't mean, you know that it means something. You know that it's real. You know that this was a different kind of tzaddik. Va'at alis al kulana. This was a different category of soul. And that the Geula Hasid, the coming redemption, is bound up with this tzaddik and his Torah revelations. And that's just the way it is. And what a privilege that we have every week to be learning his teachings together, to be drawing on this fountain of wisdom and depth and kedusha and guidance and holiness and consciousness. And be'ezras Hashem, we should be zoche through the teachings of this tzaddik to be able to hear that inner shofar call of those angels that are proclaiming redemption, that are calling all of us home, that are calling all of the different parts of us that we feel don't have a place to reintegrate, to bring all of those nikudas and to integrate them into a bigger picture. You know, like Rabbi Nachman's famous teaching about the people dancing, and there's somebody sitting on the side who is so sad. And the Rebbe said you just grab him by the hand and pull him into the circle, and before you know it, he's also dancing. And of course that has to do with the teaching that we just learned. There are parts of us that they just need to be brought into proximity of the part of us that's already singing and dancing, the part of us that is already simple and full of gratitude and full of humility, and then all of the parts are dancing and singing. Because all there is the Ein Sof, all there is Ein Od Milvadai. That's the ultimate song, that's the ultimate revelation, and in that place, nothing's lost. In that place, everything is the way that it's supposed to be. And then once a person realizes that, they're able to further heal, further integrate, further progress, further rise, and grow, and develop, and evolve, and flourish. And that's the bracha that I give myself, the bracha that I give all of you. And looking forward to continuing this journey. Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach next week. Okay, so we're going to cut the shiur a little bit short. We're just very, very busy with a campaign, Be'ezras Hashem, actually coming up on Sunday, so please be on the lookout for that. We raise much needed funds for the upcoming year and all the different avodas that I do here in London and also generally online. And looking forward to sharing good news. Be'ezras Hashem, only b'suras tovos. Thank you everybody for joining the shiur. As always, I'm wishing you an amazing, phenomenal rest of your day. Yashikrach, thank you so much. Thank you.
אני הבן ואתה האב שלי שכל כך אוהב אותי האב שלי מלך חי וקיים על כל נשימה שאני